The boarding area buzzed with the usual sounds of travel, rolling suitcases, soft airport music, and the distant call for final boarding. Among the sea of passengers stood Daniel Reed, a tall man in his 40s dressed in a charcoal suit and calm confidence. He was used to traveling quietly, used to being underestimated. When he stepped into first class, the air felt different, sharper, watchful. He placed his briefcase beside his seat and opened his newspaper. He didn't need to look up to feel the tension forming around him. A voice sliced through the air like a command. "Sir, you need to move to the back. This section is for premium passengers only." The words came from a flight attendant standing just a few feet away. Her name tag read Melissa. Her tone wasn't neutral, it was loaded. Every passenger turned. Some pretended not to stare. Others didn't even try to hide it. Daniel didn't react. He lifted his coffee cup, took a measured sip, and turned a page in his newspaper. Melissa crossed her arms. "Sir, did you hear me?" Her voice had the sharp edge of authority, the kind that expects instant obedience. But Daniel's silence wasn't defiance. It was composure. Years of boardrooms, lawsuits, and life had taught him when not to react. The tension in the cabin deepened. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. Melissa's colleague, Ryan, peeked from the galley. "Everything okay here?" She gestured toward Daniel. "He's in the wrong seat." That sentence, spoken so casually, carried the full weight of assumption. Daniel folded his newspaper and looked up for the first time. His expression was calm, polite, almost curious. "Is there a problem?" Melissa blinked. "Yes, sir. This area is reserved for first-class passengers." "I see," Daniel said evenly. "And what makes you think I'm not one?" Her certainty wavered, but only slightly. "Your ticket, please." He reached into his jacket and handed her a crisp boarding pass. Seat 2A, exactly where he was sitting. Melissa studied it, turned it over, held it to the light as if authenticity could be found in the reflection. Ryan frowned. "It doesn't look right," he murmured. The passengers were watching now, recording, whispering, judging. A woman across the aisle lifted her phone discreetly. Another started live streaming. The familiar modern reflex when something uncomfortable happens. Record it. Outside, the gate agent's voice echoed over the intercom. "We'll be departing shortly. Please prepare for final boarding." But inside, time seemed to slow. Melissa handed the ticket back with hesitation. "Sir, how did you obtain this?" Daniel's answer was steady. "I purchased it." "From where?" "The airline." Her jaw tightened. "Which website?" "Your website," her lips pressed together. The conversation should have ended right there, but it didn't. Ryan stepped closer. "Maybe we should call the gate desk." Daniel watched them quietly. His breathing didn't change. His voice stayed calm. But his eyes, those sharp, focused eyes, missed nothing. While the attendants huddled near the galley, whispering, Daniel returned to his paper. The headline above the fold read, "Global Air Merges with Apex Holdings in Billion-Dollar Deal." A small, knowing smile touched the corner of his mouth. What the attendants didn't notice, what nobody noticed, was the logo embossed into the leather of Daniel's briefcase. The same logo printed on the airline's napkins, headrests, and coffee cups. Melissa's voice broke the moment. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while we verify your ticket." Daniel didn't move. "I'm in my assigned seat with a valid ticket. You're free to verify whatever you like. I'll remain here." The cameras caught everything. The livestream numbers were climbing fast. Thousands of viewers watching in real time, seeing a man treated like an intruder in a place he had paid to be. The whispers grew louder. "It's 2025, someone muttered. "Are we really still doing this?" Melissa motioned toward the gate. "Ryan, get the supervisor. Now." Ryan nodded, disappearing toward the aircraft door. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He had been in boardrooms filled with hostility, but something about this moment felt heavier. Not because it was new, but because it was still happening. He opened his eyes again, calm as ever. "You have 45 minutes until takeoff," he said quietly, "and you're about to make a mistake you'll regret for far longer than that." The line wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The livestream chat exploded. The supervisor arrived at the cabin door with quick, impatient steps. Her name was Clara, and she carried herself like someone used to being obeyed. Melissa met her halfway down the aisle, her voice sharp with certainty. Clara, I think this man's boarding pass is fake. The word fake carried through the cabin like thunder. Heads turned. Phones angled higher. Daniel didn't move. He simply folded his paper and placed it neatly on the tray in front of him. Clara turned toward him. Sir, I'm going to need to see that boarding pass again. He handed it over without a word. Clara examined it, frowned, and looked back at Melissa. It looks legitimate. Melissa shook her head. But the print's too clean. No one books first class this late. Clara hesitated. Doubt flickered across her face. Sir, would you mind opening your briefcase for us? The cabin fell completely silent. The engines hummed softly beneath the floor. Daniel's eyes lifted to meet hers. For what reason? Random security screening, she said, her tone losing confidence with each word. The phrase hung in the air. Everyone knew what it really meant. Daniel leaned back slightly. If it's random, why am I the only one being asked? The live stream numbers crossed 10,000. Comment after comment appeared on screens across the world. This is discrimination. She's targeting him. Don't open it. They have no reason. Clara looked at Melissa, but Melissa didn't meet her eyes. The moment stretched long enough for everyone on board to feel the weight of it. Finally, Clara sighed. Sir, please cooperate so we can all move on. Daniel nodded once, slowly. Cooperation isn't the problem, he said softly. Assumption is, and with that, he closed his eyes again, resting his hands on his lap, calm as a man waiting for a meeting to begin. Ryan returned with 2 security officers and a tall man in uniform, Captain Harris. His presence shifted the energy instantly. He spoke with the quiet authority of someone used to diffusing chaos. What's going on here? Melissa stepped forward quickly. Captain, this passenger's ticket appears suspicious. We've asked him to comply with security protocol, but he's refusing. Captain Harris took the ticket from Clara, glanced at it, then at Daniel. Sir, may I ask where you got this? Daniel met his gaze. From your airline's website, Captain. The same place anyone buys a seat. The captain studied him carefully. Your name, sir? Daniel Reed. The captain's eyes flickered with faint recognition. The name tugged at some memory he couldn't place. But before he could think longer, Clara interrupted. Captain, we're delaying the flight. Harris exhaled slowly. All right. We'll resolve this quickly. He turned back to Daniel. Would you mind stepping off the plane while we verify this, sir? Daniel's expression didn't change. I would mind. I've done nothing wrong. That single sentence carried more weight than any argument, calm, controlled, indisputable. The passengers shifted uncomfortably. The woman recording whispered into her phone, He's being so calm. They're cornering him for nothing. Melissa's lips tightened. Captain, please, but Captain Harris raised his hand. That's enough. He looked around the cabin. We'll handle this professionally. Yet before he could take another step, Daniel's phone buzzed on the tray. A notification appeared, clear and visible. Board meeting reminder, 2:30 p.m., Apex Holdings. The woman filming gasped softly. Oh my God, she whispered into her live feed. He's with Apex, that's the parent company of this airline. The comment section erupted. The number of viewers jumped past 20,000 in seconds. The story was spreading faster than the plane could taxi. Melissa saw the phone too. For the first time, uncertainty crept into her voice. Sir, are you with Apex? Daniel didn't answer. He simply reached for his phone, turned it face down, and said quietly, You should focus on your job. The air in the cabin grew thick. Clara turned pale. Ryan swallowed hard. Even Captain Harris took a small step back, sensing something far greater than an awkward misunderstanding unfolding. From the back of the plane, a murmur began to rise. Someone said, He's corporate. Another voice added, They're done. The captain leaned closer, lowering his voice. Sir, who exactly are you? Daniel looked up at him, steady and composed. I'm someone who believes respect shouldn't depend on appearance, and I'm also someone you'll be seeing again very soon. No one spoke after that. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Moments later, the intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain seated. It was more than a delay now. It was a moment the entire internet was watching unfold in real time. Daniel picked up his newspaper again and said, You have 30 minutes until departure. Let's see what you choose to do with them. The live stream jumped past 50,000 viewers. Major news outlets were tuning in, The words flight injustice were beginning to trend. And for the crew, the realization began to settle like cold air in the cabin. They had crossed a line that could not be walked back. Outside the aircraft door, more security officers were gathering. Inside, truth was about to meet authority, and the quiet man in seat 2A was about to reveal who he really was. The next few minutes would define careers, reputations, and the future of an entire airline, and no one on board, not even Daniel, could predict just how far the consequences would reach. The heavy footsteps came first, then the low rumble of voices from the jet bridge. 2 airport security officers stepped inside, followed by a man in a dark navy suit. His badge identified him as Tom Briggs, the head of airport security. The moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted again, nervousness mixed with the sterile smell of authority. "Who made the call?" Briggs asked sharply. Clara pointed toward Melissa, who quickly lowered her hand, realizing what she'd just done. "Explain," Briggs said. Melissa's voice wavered. "We have a passenger with a ticket that appears inconsistent." He refused to comply with a random screening request. Briggs turned to Daniel. "Sir, may I see your ID?" Daniel handed it to him calmly. Briggs studied the ID, then the ticket, then Daniel's face. Something in his posture changed almost imperceptibly. "This looks valid," he said, glancing at Clara. Melissa stepped in again. "But we just need to make sure." Briggs stopped her. "You need to stop talking." The entire first class was now silent. The passengers, still recording, didn't dare to move. The live feed was up to 80,000 viewers and climbing. "Sir," Briggs said quietly, turning back to Daniel. "I apologize for the inconvenience. This shouldn't have escalated." But before he could continue, a voice came through the security officer's radio. "Supervisor, we have confirmation of corporate travel manifest. Passenger Daniel Reed is listed as a verified Apex executive." Everyone froze. Melissa's face drained of color. Clara's hand went to her mouth. Ryan looked down at the floor as if it could swallow him whole. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He simply said, "Now that you know who I am, let's see if you treat me differently." Briggs straightened. "Mr. Reed, we're very sorry." Daniel held up a hand. "Don't apologize yet. This is bigger than an apology." The live stream exploded with comments. "He's corporate. He owns them. This is going to be bad." Captain Harris looked between Daniel and the trembling crew. "Mr. Reed, I assure you," Daniel interrupted him gently. "Assure me of what, Captain? That my presence in this seat was a threat to company policy? That you allowed your staff to publicly humiliate a paying passenger without evidence?" His tone wasn't raised, but the quiet control in his words made every sentence land like a verdict. Briggs cleared his throat. "We can resolve this privately." "No," Daniel said, his voice steady. "We'll resolve it properly." He opened his briefcase with slow precision. Inside were neatly arranged documents, an embossed notebook, and a slim silver tablet. He lifted the tablet, unlocked it, and placed it on the tray. The screen glowed with a logo that matched the one on his briefcase. Apex Holdings. Melissa made a small sound in her throat. Clara stepped back, one hand gripping the edge of a seat for balance. Daniel turned the screen toward Briggs. "This is the acquisition document for your airline signed last month. I'm the lead executive on the transition board." The words struck like thunder. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade. Briggs looked at him completely still. "You mean to tell me?" "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "I'm the one responsible for deciding whether this airline continues to operate under Apex control or whether it's dissolved." Melissa sank into a seat. Her hands trembled. "Oh my God," she whispered. The passengers who had been recording lowered their phones slightly. They weren't sure whether they were filming a scandal or history. Daniel looked around the cabin, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "This isn't about me. It's about a culture, a reflex that still exists. To assume, to judge, to diminish. The problem isn't who I am, it's what you assumed I wasn't." Captain Harris tried to speak, but Daniel's gaze stopped him cold. "Every interaction," Daniel continued, "every decision made on this flight has been recorded, broadcasted and seen by tens of thousands of people. You didn't just make a mistake. You taught a lesson. Unfortunately, it's one your company can't afford to keep repeating." The radio in Briggs's hand crackled again. "Supervisor, media outlets have picked up the live stream. It's trending." Briggs swallowed hard. "Understood. Daniel looked at him evenly. Then let's make sure what happens next is worth watching. He turned the tablet back toward himself and began scrolling through a file. Your airline's current discrimination complaints, 17 this quarter. 4 involving flight attendants, 3 involving gate supervisors. No formal action taken in 12 of those cases. Melissa pressed a hand to her forehead. Please, I didn't. Daniel's tone stayed cool. You didn't think it mattered. That's the problem. He looked at the captain. How long until takeoff? 15 minutes, Captain Harris answered softly. Good, Daniel said. That's enough time to start fixing what's broken. The live stream had crossed 100,000 viewers. People weren't just watching anymore. They were cheering, commenting, demanding justice. Daniel leaned back, folded his hands and said quietly, Before this flight ends, the world will see what accountability looks like. No one dared to speak after that. Not the crew, not the officers, not even the captain. Outside, the afternoon light flooded the windows. Inside, every second stretched like a lifetime. Daniel closed the tablet and looked at the trembling staff. You have 10 minutes left to decide whether you'll be remembered for change or for disgrace. The words hung in the air as the clock ticked closer to departure. For the first time, Melissa's authority was gone. Clara's confidence had collapsed into silence. Ryan stared blankly ahead, and Daniel Reed, the man they'd mistaken for an intruder, now sat as the quiet judge of their futures. The pilot's intercom clicked on. Ladies and gentlemen, we're awaiting clearance for departure. Thank you for your patience. But everyone knew this flight was no longer just about travel. It had become a turning point, one that would redefine what respect meant in the skies. And Daniel had just begun. Daniel looked out the window for a long moment. The sky outside was washed in the soft light of late afternoon, calm and endless, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside the cabin. When he finally turned back, the tension felt almost physical, pressing against every wall of the aircraft. Captain, he said evenly, I want a word with your full crew before we depart. Captain Harris hesitated. Sir, that's highly unusual. Not today, Daniel replied. Today is unusual by definition. The captain nodded, signaling quietly to the attendants. Melissa stood frozen until Clara touched her arm, whispering, Go. Within minutes, the entire crew gathered at the front of first class. They looked like soldiers awaiting judgment, uniforms perfect but hands trembling. The passengers sat quietly, some still recording, others watching with wide, uncertain eyes. Daniel rested his hand on the closed briefcase beside him. You've made assumptions about me, he said. You've drawn conclusions based on what I look like, not who I am. You've embarrassed yourselves, your company, and this flight, but I'm not interested in revenge. His voice softened just slightly, but it carried the kind of quiet authority that made everyone listen. I'm interested in truth, because truth, unlike assumption, can't be hidden once it's seen. The tablet screen glowed again. He opened a document titled Apex Acquisition Agreement, Final Phase Review. Charts and figures illuminated the faces of the crew as Daniel scrolled slowly. This agreement, he said, details how Apex Holdings acquires companies that have failed to meet standards of integrity, safety, and equality. It outlines performance expectations, employee conduct, and compliance with federal anti-discrimination law. He stopped scrolling. Section 501, Immediate Termination Clause. Any employee found engaging in discriminatory or prejudiced behavior toward passengers or colleagues during the transition period will be terminated without severance. Effective immediately. A soft gasp rippled through the crew. Melissa took a step back, gripping the edge of a seat for balance. Clara's throat tightened as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Daniel's tone remained calm. Your airline has 17 pending discrimination complaints on record this quarter. 12 of them involve flight staff. None were investigated properly. He turned the tablet toward the captain. And the Department of Transportation is already watching your carrier closely. One more verified incident and federal review becomes mandatory. Captain Harris swallowed hard. Mr. Reed, I assure you this isn't representative of how we... It's representative enough, Daniel said quietly. Because today you didn't need an excuse. You needed an example. Outside, the sun glinted off the wing, flashing briefly through the windows like a signal. Inside, silence filled every inch of the air. Do you know what happens if Apex withdraws from this deal? Daniel asked. No one answered. He continued, his voice measured. Your airline collapses in under 6 months. 12,000 people lose their jobs. Thousands of passengers stranded. Billions in debt unpaid. All because a company couldn't learn basic decency. Melissa's breathing quickened. Please, she said, barely above a whisper. I didn't mean... Daniel raised his hand. Meaning has nothing to do with consequence. The woman recording from across the aisle whispered to her phone. He's ending them. Right here on the plane. The viewership count on her stream had reached 200,000 and climbing. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Melissa, you'll be dismissed immediately upon landing. Clara, you're suspended pending investigation. Ryan, your file will be reviewed, but you'll remain on board until arrival. Captain Harris, you'll report to corporate management after this flight for procedural review. No one moved. He continued. Security will escort you, Melissa, from the aircraft once we land. Consider this not punishment, but consequence. Every assumption has one. Melissa sank slowly into the nearest seat. Her voice cracked. I've never been treated like this. Daniel looked at her, his gaze steady but not cruel. And I've been treated like this too many times. The difference is I still had to stay calm. The words hit harder than any raised voice could. The passengers were still watching, but now the silence was reverent. This wasn't outrage anymore. It was awe. Daniel turned back to the captain. Once we're airborne, I'll address the crew again. There's more they need to hear. This isn't over. The captain nodded mutely. Daniel picked up his newspaper again, opening it to the same page he'd been reading at the start. The headline still gleamed in black ink. Apex Holdings expands global air control. Acquisition vote pending. He smiled faintly. I believe we have a flight to catch. Captain Harris returned to the cockpit, voice trembling slightly as he made the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are cleared for departure. As the plane began to move, the passengers' phones vibrated with notifications. The video of Daniel's quiet confrontation had gone viral, across continents, languages, and networks. Every moment, every sentence was being replayed online. In seat 2A, Daniel simply sat back, watching the clouds drift past. He wasn't thinking about the video. He was thinking about the boardroom waiting for him. He would walk into that room in less than 3 hours. And the decision he would make there wouldn't just change a company. It would change an industry. The engines roared. The runway blurred beneath them. And as the aircraft lifted off the ground, so did the story of Daniel Reed, the man who turned prejudice into policy. The plane leveled off above the clouds, the engines humming with a steady rhythm. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. Passengers whispered to one another, the kind of hushed conversation people use when they know they're witnessing history. Daniel placed his tablet on the tray table again. He looked calm, but inside his thoughts were focused and deliberate. This was no longer a misunderstanding, it was an opportunity. Captain, he said quietly, bring the remaining attendants here. Within minutes, the small group gathered again at the front of first class. Melissa was gone, escorted to a jump seat near the rear of the plane. Clara and Ryan stood stiffly, eyes low, afraid to speak. Daniel looked at them one by one. I'm not here to destroy you, he said. I'm here to teach something that should have been learned a long time ago. He swiped on his tablet, pulling up a presentation, columns of numbers, charts, and reports. This is your airline's record for the last 12 months. Customer satisfaction, 2.3 out of 5 stars. Industry average, 3.8. Verified discrimination complaints, 17. Average response time, 47 days. Number of resolved cases, 1, he paused. This isn't a problem of individuals. It's a problem of culture. And culture doesn't change until someone makes it impossible to ignore. The crew said nothing. The passengers were transfixed. The live stream had crossed 400,000 viewers. The story was spreading beyond the airport, beyond the airline. Hashtags were multiplying across every platform. Daniel continued, his tone steady and calm. Apex Holdings specializes in rebuilding companies that have lost the trust of their customers. But Apex doesn't rebuild by forgiveness. It rebuilds by accountability. If a system breaks, we replace it. If leadership fails, we change it. And if discrimination is found, we end it. He turned the tablet again. A new document filled the screen, titled Policy Revision Proposal, Equality and Conduct. Every employee will undergo mandatory sensitivity training. No exceptions. Every customer interaction will be reviewed through a real-time analytics system designed to flag bias. Every complaint will reach senior management within 24 hours. Ryan shifted uneasily. Sir, that's a massive overhaul. Daniel nodded. Yes, but it's necessary. Because every time a customer is treated unfairly, it's not just an incident, it's a reflection of leadership failure. And this airline has failed too many times. He leaned forward slightly. The reason Apex acquires struggling airlines isn't profit. It's reform. But that reform depends on one vote. Clara looked up. Yours, she whispered. Daniel nodded once. Mine. Outside, sunlight spilled across the clouds, a golden ocean stretching endlessly beneath the wings. The serenity of the view clashed with the weight of what was happening inside the cabin. The board will meet in less than 2 hours, Daniel said. If I vote to proceed with the acquisition, this airline will survive. If I vote against it, your company collapses within 90 days. Clara blinked. 90 days? Daniel's voice was calm but final. 60 days of debt accumulation. 30 days of asset liquidation. By day 90, operations end. 12,000 employees without work. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. And all that depends on one decision? Daniel looked at him. All of it. The passengers had fallen completely silent. The woman who had started the live stream lowered her phone slightly, her voice trembling as she whispered to her viewers. He holds their entire future. One man, one vote. Daniel's gaze swept across the cabin. But before I decide, he said, I want to understand something. When you saw me sit in this seat, why did you assume I didn't belong here? Was it the color of my skin? The price of the ticket? The way I looked? Because none of those things should matter. Not in business. Not in humanity. No one could answer, he continued, his tone softer now. Every organization has a moment that defines it. For some, it's a tragedy. For others, it's a choice. This flight is your moment. You can be the reason this company falls apart, or the reason it changes forever. Clara's eyes glistened. Sir, I didn't realize what I was doing. Daniel nodded slowly. That's the problem. Discrimination rarely looks like hatred. It looks like assumptions. It looks like protocol. It hides behind professionalism and procedure, but at its core it's still the same. The captain stood by quietly, listening. He'd flown through turbulence, storms, and emergencies, but nothing felt heavier than this conversation. Daniel tapped his tablet again. A graph appeared. This is the cost of discrimination. In lawsuits, in settlements, in reputation, in lost human dignity, and yet the cost of training, empathy, and reform is far less. He looked at Clara. Which one would you choose if it were your company? Clara swallowed. Reform, she whispered. Daniel nodded. Then act like it. The engines roared softly as the plane moved through a band of sunlight. The live stream had now passed 600,000 viewers. People from around the world were watching, not just for the drama, but for the message. Something about Daniel's calm power, his refusal to humiliate or yell, was changing the tone of the entire conversation. He leaned back, closing the tablet. You can't erase what happened today, but you can decide what it means. I'll make my recommendation to the board soon. The rest is up to how you choose to behave after this. The woman filming whispered into her phone. He's not punishing them. He's teaching them. Daniel looked toward her. Teaching only works if people choose to learn. Outside, the sky was beginning to burn gold at the edges, the first hint of sunset painting the clouds. The captain gave a quiet update over the intercom, but no one was really listening. All eyes were still on Daniel Reed, the man who had turned a simple flight into a global reckoning. He reopened his paper, glancing at the same article he'd started with before all of this began. The words felt heavier now. Apex Holdings prepares to reshape the industry. He smiled faintly. Yes, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Let's reshape it. As the aircraft continued toward Chicago, the world below was changing with it. The wheels touched down with a soft thud that carried the weight of everything that had unfolded in the air. The passengers exhaled collectively, as if they'd been holding their breath for hours. Chicago spread out beneath a fading sky, lights beginning to flicker across the skyline. The intercom came alive. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. But nobody moved. No one was thinking about luggage or connections. Every eye was still on Daniel Reed. He closed his newspaper and slipped the tablet into his briefcase. As the engines quieted, security officers entered the cabin once more. This time, they weren't here for him. Melissa was escorted off the plane without a word. The same people who had once followed her instructions now avoided her eyes. Clara stood motionless by the galley, her hands folded tightly. Ryan sat in silence, staring at the floor, knowing that nothing about this flight would ever be forgotten. Daniel rose slowly, straightened his jacket, and picked up his briefcase. He nodded to the captain. "Thank you for the flight." Captain Harris swallowed hard. "Mr. Reed, I hope this ends with understanding." Daniel's eyes were steady. "It will end with accountability. That's the only kind of understanding that lasts." The passengers parted to make room for him as he walked down the aisle. A few nodded respectfully. Some whispered words of apology. Others simply watched, knowing they had seen something extraordinary. A man who never raised his voice yet changed everything. Outside the jet bridge, a black sedan waited. Daniel stepped inside, placed his briefcase on the seat beside him, and watched as the plane faded behind tinted glass. Within 30 minutes, he was in the Apex Holdings Tower downtown. The boardroom was vast and silent, polished wood gleaming under soft lights. 6 faces turned toward him as he entered, executives who had watched the entire ordeal through live feeds. The chairman spoke first. "We've seen the footage. The world has seen it. What's your recommendation, Daniel?" Daniel opened his briefcase, placed the tablet on the table, and scrolled to the final page of his report. "Proceed with the acquisition," he said, "but with conditions." He looked at each board member in turn. "Every employee of that airline will complete comprehensive bias and empathy training. New monitoring systems will track every customer interaction for signs of discrimination. All complaints will bypass local management and go directly to Apex's Executive Ethics Division." He paused. "We're not buying a company. We're rebuilding an industry." The chairman nodded slowly, "And the staff involved?" Daniel's voice remained calm. "Terminations processed where appropriate. Suspensions pending full review. Permanent policy reform implemented immediately." The vote was unanimous. The acquisition passed with all 7 hands raised. The reforms began that very night. Within 24 hours, the airline announced sweeping new changes. Within a week, regulators praised the unprecedented transparency. Within a month, airlines across the nation began following the same model. But for Daniel, it wasn't about headlines. It was about something simpler, proving that integrity could still exist in places ruled by profit. 3 months later, he boarded another flight. Same route, same airline, seat 2A. The cabin looked new, brighter, calmer. The flight attendant who greeted him smiled warmly. "Good evening, Mr. Reed. Welcome aboard. Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Daniel smiled back. "Just coffee, black, no questions." No hesitation. Just service, the way it should have been from the start. He looked out the window as the engines began to rumble. The clouds were waiting again, soft and endless. He thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the silence, the decision, the change. All of it had begun with one false assumption and one quiet refusal to accept it. Respect wasn't something to be asked for. It was something to be demanded through action. As the plane lifted into the sky, Daniel took a slow sip of coffee. The taste was smooth, unbothered, like peace earned through persistence. On the screens of millions, his story continued to live, not as gossip, but as a lesson. Not as outrage, but as change. In airports and offices across the world, people spoke his name quietly, respectfully. They called him the man who turned humiliation into reform, the man who never shouted but made the loudest impact of all. Every crew member hired after that day was trained under new rules, rules Daniel had written. Every complaint filed was handled within 72 hours. Discrimination cases dropped by 60% industry-wide within a year. He hadn't just changed an airline. He had changed the standard of human decency in corporate life. As the seatbelt sign blinked off, Daniel opened his newspaper to the business section. The headline read, "Apex Airlines leads industry with new equality initiative." He smiled quietly, folded the paper and looked out the window again. In that silence, between the hum of engines and the heartbeat of progress, the truth was clear. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply takes a man sitting in his rightful seat refusing to move. And when that happens, the world moves instead.